Cool. So welcome back to the channel. This is the video about Bristol's worst AI that is being created, the Think Family Planning app. So go and check out the last video for all of the initial details. I'm here with Shakara, who is somebody that I've been working with over the last couple of years as it relates to artificial intelligence. So in future videos, we'll speak a little bit more about the projects that we're developing together. But basically, I gave her a look at all of the links that I put in the last video so that she could have her own view on exactly what it is that we're talking about. So, the Think Family Planning app, as a summary, is a collection of data taken by an organization which has sprung off from the council that has allegedly been started by a former chief of police. And it takes data from places like housing, like Bernardo's,
Yeah,
NHS records. There are
child
various
protection services and things
child
like that.
protection services. There's multiple different, effectively like council-based services that they get their data from. And just a quick add-on from the last video, something that I didn't say, just as some examples. So the kind of data that they'll take is people missing payments on their mortgage, people missing payments on their rent. They'll use information like that to then say that children are more likely to be involved in gang activity. And again, I'm going to say allegedly before we get the universities to come and say the specifics, but even down to saying that people have the potential to become terrorists, this sort of stuff. So, yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes. Hi, my name is Shakara. I am a poet and researcher. I just a year ago now, I guess, I finished my PhD in theoretical chemistry, then and kind of was very interested in not only writing before, but also more technical things like AI and artificial intelligence. And in that stead, Vince and I have been working together for a while. We've made some really cool work. Having looked at some of the literature that you sent me around this, my mind is actually blown because it's so egregious. Like the sort of capabilities that something like this has, i.e., if it's misused, which is not an if, it's like a when, like
Mhm.
institutions that bring all their data together under the council, it kind of presents a sort of like you can make a profile of someone, for example, which
Mhm.
like people can use and like governments can use to for whatever they want to use it for. And I don't think like it's a I don't think it's out of the realms of like possibilities for that to happen. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes
Mhm.
people think like, oh, well, it's crazy to think that they would actually do something that is evil and that is like unethical. But I mean, even this feels really unethical. It doesn't seem to be. Um, no one's being transparent, I think.
Yeah, there's a severe lack of transparency, and like I said in the previous video, as it relates to the university trying to engage with them and kind of look at it from a critical point of view, initially from like, hey, maybe we can see if there are some possible upgrades. They actually started off and then progressively got less transparent. Again, allegedly based on a change of management. So not only does the structure itself seem like something that is like inherently made to be abused, but then even like the psychology of how they're reacting to the engagement isn't of somebody who's trying to be open, trying to be fair, trying to. So it's like they're not even attempting because we know that in this field of artificial intelligence, there's a lot of there's a lot of unknowns. Like even the biggest artificial intelligence companies are working with plans where they're having to try and predict what the future would be like. And yet the people in this organization are claiming to like know things. Like they're saying like, oh no, the data's fine. Even OpenAI wouldn't just say the data's fine. They'd be like, we're constantly working on it. Do you know what I mean? Building it. We're like upgrading from one to another. They're saying like, no, their data is fine. Their training is fine. Like the way that they collect the data is, completely above board. Yet they're mixing so many different institutions together. It's like, well, okay, how have you even mapped out how what's going to happen when all these variables mix? Because this is the first time that has happened.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how governments often use a intention of helping people who are less fortunate
Hmm.
to bring about like really very, I keep saying egregious, but like these policies that impinge on people's privacy. But they like this is like a historic thing. That's what governments do. And
Hmm.
so when I was looking at the website, there was like this thing about like ethics and data ethics that they're like I didn't get to kind of like delve into, but I thought it was really interesting because I think in these under these like institutional umbrellas, so the Center of Data Ethics, I wonder if the people, it's like the people that's centered in it
Hmm.
rather than the data or the government's, like, i.e., the Bristol City Council's interests.
Yeah.
Because it just strikes me as interesting how, like, they're using words like groundbreaking, they're doing these safeguarding things, they're kind of presenting themselves as saviors in a
Yeah.
way.
Hmm.
And I wonder how, if the people that they've collected this data on as consented to their data being used in this way. And another thing that it like I'm curious about is like, well, are they saying that the data they collect on me isn't owned by me and is owned by them? I'm just
Well, it's that's actually a deep one because inherently the answer has to be yes. Because if a university like who's saying that they're going to do something that's going to be open to the public to see is going and asking for the information and they're telling them no, but all of these families' data is already in there. So, you know, the avenues that they would have used to try and get, some of them are like with their kind of like academic prestige, and some of it is just like freedom of information stuff. They've tried every angle. So if they couldn't get the data as an individual, that means that you don't own it, which is deep because then it does then come to the point where, the whole Zuckerberg thing, which, ultimately I do know that the Zuckerberg thing was 100% wrong when it came to like the data analytica. Like, I'm not making any excuses for him, but the only thing I will say is that Facebook was a business from the get-go. So everybody who was interacting with Facebook was consenting to interact with a commercial entity. It wasn't a charity. It wasn't like a government body. Whereas all of this data is, so it's like, you miss a payment on your mortgage, like you've just consented to have the deal that you did with the mortgage company. Like, you've never said that you've allowed that data to be in any other forum. And even though you do know that data like that does end up getting shipped, like you're saying, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to like get one person, like to get like a human being who represents the app and asks them that question. Like, does this represent the individual citizens? Does it represent the Bristol City Council? Or does it represent the actual like commercial entity with their Fugazi website? Like, is it actually their data? Like, are they actually like, do they own it? Like, are they the Facebook of the situation who would then have the same like legal right to sell that data? Like, I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. I think the answer would be different depending on who you spoke to. Like, I think it would be, if you spoke to the developer, it would be different versus this person who's this chief who's like come up with this or seems to be the face of the idea generation. But also, I think what's really interesting is that when we think about data, we think about numbers, right? We think
Mhm.
1, 2, 3. But what these things are built on is like quantitative, like qualitative data, excuse me.
Yeah,
The sort of like information that you could get from running an unsupervised like algorithm on a bunch of qualitative like indicators
yeah,
is like is actually beyond racism and classism. When I was reading the website, they were like, yeah, there are these like kind of like not dog whistle things, but there are these like stereotypical things that people say when it comes to things like that. It'll be classist, it'll be racist, da da da. But
yeah,
like, I think it's way more than that. I think like I struggle to even like put that into words right now, but like when you have all of these qualitative data points from people, you can make connections that you can't even dream of. Like you alluded to the mortgage thing. Like
yeah,
you can if you can run these ads, which are personalized ads, right? If someone like, you can run ads based on people's location, based on all these like metrics.
Mm-hmm.
If like the council, how much of your data does the council have? What kinds of your data does the council have? The
Mm-hmm.
connection with like the NHS, with like other organizations that like you wouldn't want them sharing your information with each other,
Yeah.
much less with a commercial entity that's building something that you don't know how it's built. You don't know. They talk about bias, but like they use these words in such a way that they don't really explain what they mean or what they mean by them. So it requires a lot of your own inference to kind of
Mm-hmm.
like essentially come up with something out of thin air, which I think is another like a ploy that kind of uses people's like ignorance against them and their
Mm-hmm.
lack of ability to like there's loads of stuff going on, we can't all engage at the same time. It kind of uses that against people, I think. Groundbreaking, like, yes, we're trying to help people, trying to safeguard. So all you think, yeah, oh, you know, the council is trying to help people. Obviously these children are vulnerable, they use words like vulnerability, they need help, and so
Mm-hmm.
people just switch off. But like when you really deep and think, they're like, oh yeah, well, we are trying to collect data on the vulnerable people in a city that is being gentrified to nobody's
Yeah.
business. What are we going to use this data to push them out? People have already been pushed out of St. Paul's. People have
Yeah.
already been pushed out of so many of the places in Bristol that don't, even in 10 years that I lived there, don't look at all like they did.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, it just seems so nefarious. And even if like you try and like trying to find the best in it, it just reeks of like the typical governmental, like sort of, I'm wondering who's getting paid. That's what I'm wondering, like who's getting
Yeah.
paid, basically.
Well, and the other thing for me is the fact that the kind of conclusions that they're coming to are the kind of conclusions that involve police. So they're talking about people's proximity to being in gangs and other sort of stuff like that. And yet, inside of this data point, police are nowhere to be seen. So it's like there's no way, there's no point in this AI about showing how policing affects different areas. So there's no thing about how like how policed your area is and how that affects your outcomes, or how much like are you in a demographic which has already been previously shown to be targeted by the police, because it's like they're making these judgments on people, and the judgments themselves are affecting people. So if you come and you tell a vulnerable, as they've already clarified, young person who maybe is in the realm of going down one of two paths, and then you tell them, oh, we've got the data to say that you're going to go down the bad path, what's that going to do? And it's like inside of that, they don't even have, okay, and we're also now collecting data on our police force. We're going to be doing the exact same thing within our own system. We're going to do the same thing with our counselors. We're going to do the same thing with our economics. We're going to do the same thing with all of our doctors, and make sure. So it's like, it's so dishonest, like what you're saying, to say, oh, we're going to help the vulnerable, but this technology could be just as used to be doing the same thing with all the elites. And someone pointed something out on the last video. They said they basically did a rough estimate and said if there was 55 families, 2.4 children, it's roughly 20-25% of Bristol. So it's like, it's interesting that
That's like
they've already,
a significant amount of people.
yeah, it's a good chunk, but then it's just like, I wonder which types of people have been purposefully left out of it, because it's a huge chunk that's massive, and yet it's not everyone. So it's like, have they really just said we're going to target the most vulnerable? Because that's what it sounds like. It's like, let's just target the most vulnerable, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, so what's the aim? Like, where's the upliftment? Like, what part of this program is dedicated to like social mobility for these vulnerable people? Because that's what, I mean, I didn't even see a glimpse of that. Like, I didn't
Yeah,
even see like anything to do with any aspect of this data being used to improve anybody's quality of life. I didn't see
no,
any of
I
that.
can see that. Well, there's like the Think Family Education app, but even when
Yeah.
I was reading through the information about that on the landing page, it was quite like it was hard to grasp because it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't really well worded for transparency.
What? Um,
um
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go
no, it's
on.
like it's the app itself. I think that's like the focus of the university research. But obviously the data is the foundation of the app. So that's where it's like the whole point is like, oh, you're making this app. Can we see the data? So it's like, yes, no, the app is not transparent at all. Like and the only narratives that I've heard are about negative things, but we already know in Bristol, like so many people with mental health issues who end up doing violent crimes, they slip through. So people will be in areas saying for weeks on end, like there's somebody effectively going mad, like there's somebody having a breakdown and it's going to escalate. Or the reverse, there's been times in Bristol where it's like there's somebody with mental health issues and people in the area are like, this person's getting picked on, like some like this person's being targeted as a
Oh,
vulnerable person, and they also slip through. So it's like there's none of that was in the discussion. There was nothing actually about like identifying people with the aim of helping them. So that's the thing is like it just seems like a very it's like it seems like the end game. That's why I've titled it the worst in Bristol and possibly in Europe because it sounds like the AI that would have been in the movie 30 years ago. Like it sounds like the end product, you know?
yeah. What I also find interesting is that the Bristol data team,
Yeah.
I really wanted to read it, but I didn't have enough time. There's this like 31-page document that they released about who they are and what they do. And at the beginning, they have these very like corporate sounding objectives that are very vague, that don't really like speak to anything quite specific, but like see just kind of puts them in a sort of paints them in a light where they seem to have your best interest at heart. And it's so funny that the word insight is used as the name, which kind of suggests some sort of higher understanding and learning, that they're trying to find and like generate knowledge,
Hmm.
and insight is such a spiritual word as well.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of virtue signaling in a
Yeah.
way. And what I'm curious about is like how, so 2015, something was going on. Like 2015 was like a really big year as well. It's in terms like politics. What is it? There's loads of things going on about Bristol Council being like bankrupt or not having loads of money. I'm just curious. I think what I'm realizing now when like things like this happen, especially like under the capitalistic, like sort of like society that we exist in, someone's getting paid, like
Yes.
someone's getting paid. It's all about other people getting paid. So I just find it interesting how the council is like partnering with like these people who are part of the police, and like we're supposed to believe that all this information stays in that specific place and does it
So
aggressive.
yeah, subscribe to the channel so that we can get some Pro Tools, so we can get the Pro Tour of this. But do you remember where you left off?
Probably
So
not because I have ADHD.
no, but you mentioned the document that you had seen from Inside.
Oh, yeah. I'm always, because I'm a writer, I'm just always curious about the language people use and the way they present themselves. And there is a pattern of like corporations using language that is very vague, but is virtue signaling, kind of where they sound like they have your best interests at heart. They care about transparency. They really care about making things safe. One of the things that it was like creating a smarter city, things like that.
Mm,
Like, who asked for any of this? Like,
yeah.
did the people vote for it? Like, did they ask that they needed this? Like, there's this thing that the government knows better what's best for us, and we don't.
Hmm.
And that's the feeling that I got from like reading all the material that I read, and then the list of indicators I was going through and kind of trying to understand what the data was that they were collecting and how the data was being presented, but I didn't really get very far. But I just think it's weird how they're saying that, yeah, where it's an insight thing, it's a thing about that's very groundbreaking, we're trying to do these things, we're making Bristol better and all
Yeah.
of that stuff. But it's not, because if it was, then easier to get the information. It
Exactly.
would be clear, like it wouldn't be, when someone is doing something good, like good for you, and something not like you're not so it's not so conflating, when they present their like ones, twos, threes, and fours. For a reasonable person, it's easy to see, oh yeah, they do have my best interest at heart. When I
Hmm.
read this, like, I don't feel that way. It kind of makes me feel very uncomfortable. I'm
Yeah.
wondering like how much, because they're telling us that they're using this data from this and this place, but like they use different agencies, right, and different contractors. So who else are they getting data from?
Yeah.
And like what kind of data are they getting? Like how are they using the data? What kind of like machine learning algorithms are they using to pass
Yeah.
this data? Is it strictly supervised learning, or is it also unsupervised learning? Like what kind of AI is it, quite black box? Like, is this lady who, or this person, sorry, I don't know if what their gender identity is, but this person who is his chief of police, like, I'm
Mm.
assuming they're not software engineers, so they've given it to software engineers. Like,
Hmm.
what, how is this whole process working? How is this thing being made? And then the education app, I'm assuming, collects data. So it's like a hungry machine. So they're making things that uses people's data, that collect data on the people that are using them.
Yeah.
And it's just like this cycle that they're feeding. So I don't know. It's very discomforting.
Yeah, the thing that gets me, and it goes back to this idea of like the commercial side and the kind of like the consent that you give when you kind of interact with capitalism and you interact with things that you already know are based on commercial. So when generative AI is being created, they've created generative AI to the point where it can make things so well that it makes certain other people uncomfortable. And it's to the point where there's a certain level of outcry for people to want those AIs to be restricted. But those are AIs that are in the hands of the people. So even though there is a genuine concern about how the data is being collected, at the end of that collection, it's actually something made for the people to use. So this is why I always ask, I'm like, I want young people to have access to the best generative AI because I believe it will be functional in multiple different ways for them to create stuff that's in their imagination as it relates to just like communicating things that they're feeling and just like creative endeavors. But then you get AIs that are made like this, that it's the opposite. It's like AIs that are being made using our stuff that are being used against us, and suddenly now you don't understand any of that. Like suddenly now you don't understand why we would need to know exactly what data you've got, exactly how it's been handled, who is handling it, like the like the education that those individuals have to be able to handle it. Because as people who are involved in software, one thing that we know quite a lot of the time when people are talking about cyber breaches and cyber attacks and like digital fallouts, this is like sometimes it's just somebody paying a disgruntled employee. That's what the cyber
Yeah,
attack was somebody paying someone £2,000 for a password or for a computer to be get left on or for a little. So the idea that it's never going to be impenetrable. That's never going to happen. That's never going to be the case. So considering this is now involving our data, then how is it that people suddenly don't understand when the things that are going to benefit, and I'm not going to say benefit us because I understand the debate, but benefit an individual. There are AIs now that are being created, and some of them even open source, that will benefit an individual. And there is discussions like from Western countries about limiting access to those sorts of AI. And yet, on the other hand, we have this thing which has the power to be just as powerful. That's the mad thing. This AI has the potential to be just as powerful as these generative AIs, but for a
yeah,
completely different reason. And so, yeah, I remember I was speaking to
yeah.
somebody last week about this, and it's like, maybe some of this is facts. That's the worst thing about it. Maybe some of this data will actually be able to predict crime to a certain level, but we need to be able to have.
Minority.
Sorry, you cut out a bit. Hold on, are you back? Say
I
that
was
again.
saying just like Report, Minority
Exactly,
Report. That's
exactly,
the
and
whole
that's a
premise of the film.
no, that's the deep thing with the Minority Report. When the protests were happening in Bristol, I was filming it, and before the big protests happened, there were the student protests, and the student protests were happening like College Green, like around like sort of like town areas. And I remember speaking to one of the policemen because the way that they were engaging with them, it's like they were treating them as criminals. They were in a place, but it's like they were creating, I can't remember, they were kettling them. That's what they called it. So it's like they
Oh
would
yeah.
kettle the people, which means that you would have to assault an officer to be able to get outside of it. And I asked him, how is it legal? And he said, well, we've got this law, which means that because you've come to this place on this day, we can make assumptions about what you're thinking and what you're going to do. And I was like Minority Report. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, you say that on camera. And he just walked off laughing. So even just based on how they want to regulate our protesting, they've got Minority Report elements in there, which has obviously been multiplied with the stuff that they now do with social media. So obviously now they can take your social media posts and make assumptions about what it is that you may or may not do. And so, as we said, now it's going to get down to, oh, okay, so we seen you at this protest, then we seen you making certain posts on social media, and now we know that you missed your mortgage payment. So now we know you're probably going to go a little bit this or a little bit that, and so it's like completely draconian. And again, the real issue is they're not even turning this same weapon on the elites and the kind of like the just the controlling class. So it's like they're not doing the same thing with police. They're not saying, hey, every time you arrest an Asian guy, they look beat up in the cell. You know what I mean? They're making complaints. Like they're like, hey, every time you deal with, female suspects, this little iffy thing happens. They're not even doing it so that everybody's been drawn under the same microscope. And even though it's like, it's a little bit iffy, but it's a little bit iffy for everyone. It's like, no, we've got this particular 25%. And that's what makes we're doing this for the vulnerable so insidious.
Insidious is the correct word. And it's so interesting how the data that they collect, i.e., on someone who's arrested, is not accessible. I don't know how accessible aspects of it are to the public. Essentially,
Mhm.
we're protected from our own data. That's kind of what it feels like. I would have to do some research to kind of like back that up a little bit more, but I don't know. That's just where my brain went. I I think that it's important
Mhm.
that actually what they kind of force us into a place of is like the normal everyday person doesn't have time to like delve deep into these things or these things that the government's doing or the Bristol City Council are doing.
Mhm.
So they kind of play that game, I think. And
Mhm.
so especially people who are vulnerable who actually are impacted by this, they
Yeah.
don't have the time or the capacity to like go and like people are worried about paying rent, going
Mhm.
and trying to understand all these AI things and trying to figure out, okay, so are they trying to like pull a wool over my eyes? It's like you damned if you do and damned if you don't. You either become a little bit obsessed, go and do some research and like spend way too much of your time and increases your anxiety and so on, or you check out and numb out and like you
Mhm.
focus on the things that you're doing, which I think is it makes it for me really clear that the intention is not empowerment.
No.
It's not like anything revolutionary as it tries to kind of frame itself to be. Think
Yep.
family, excuse me, I don't know, allegedly, I'm not legal or anything, but like sounds like a cult. Like I'm not gonna lie, it's like very
Yep.
cult language.
Yeah.
So it kind of implies, and like cults are about families or about like making people feel good, feeling connected, da da da. So I just think that they kind of use these things against people so that people don't have the opportunity to be like, oh, by the way, that this doesn't feel right because
Yep.
they don't have the language, they don't have the time. Things just happen. Like I wasn't even aware that Bristol had a data team, you
Well, and
know?
this is the thing is that like considering it's called Think Family, you would think even if they were going to do it in a fake, even if it was going to be a promise that they wouldn't even fulfill, that there would be something obviously good for families in Bristol. You know, that
Yeah.
there would be like one obvious thing that we're claiming we're going to get, because even when they present the idea of smart cities, there's at least like a Futurama-esque kind of like, oh, but this, like your transport will be super efficient and da 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 da. And like at least there's a dream, whether it's like fictional or fantastical. But with this, there's not even an attempt. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's just like coded in these particular words, which basically make it say like, look, are you really gonna go into this? Like, are you really gonna get into the nitty gritties of what this is? Probably not. Probably most people aren't. And that when I say most people, I'm actually not talking about Bristolians, because what
Yeah.
I think, this is like very much my personal opinion, but like I'm of the mindset that I think that they do experiments in the major cities, and they do different ones in different cities. So just as an example to qualify what I'm saying, so I don't just sound like super whatever. When I was in Liverpool, and that was like over 10 years ago, I remember being at a bus stop, and the bus stop talking to me at one point. There was a speaker in the bus stop that was like, stop rolling up. It basically just, the bus stop told me to not do that. And I've been back to Liverpool since, and they don't have those there anymore. And there were other things that people told me about in ends that ended up becoming true, just like in terms of like camera technology. But then in Bristol, we've had the thing where riots have happened, and then they've changed the gear. So the whole idea of like the policeman attire that is like halfway between an army and like the civilian one, that was based off the Toxteth and the St. Paul's and the Brixton riots. So I
Oh,
actually think that the reason why they're doing this in Bristol is about
yeah.
trying to figure out the kind of people who will go and throw a statue of a slave trader in
Mm.
the river. Do you know what I mean? They're trying to think like, how do we identify these types of people, because it'd be very easy for them to classify those sorts of things as unrest. If they can label those things as unruly and as bringing some sort of negative discourse to the city, that ultimately, like when things get a bit too righty, that's not like great for the city. It's not great for the economy. But obviously, when we do it, we're doing it for particular reasons, because we're saying, well, no, we're not just going to keep moving in this direction. We'd rather have a stop and have a pause, no matter how dramatic it is. And Bristol has shown that it's one of those cities that can do something like that and have global impact. So then
Yeah.
this then comes back into like, is there any foreign money involved in this stuff? Like, is there any foreign entities who are going to collect some of this data?
Paid. Someone's getting paid. And it's so funny that there is also the digital ID thing that's also happening. Like it's not happening in a vacuum, you know?
And
And it's
and
so
God.
no, you go.
No,
Wait,
I'm just gonna
I'll,
say on no, 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 do it. I'll remember. I'll remember.
I was gonna say, yeah, remember. I was gonna say like wait, no, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say that yeah, the digital ID thing is really interesting because now that all these different like organizations, specifically about the Bristol thing, family thing. Now there's different pieces of data that's coming to this like program, this AI from all these organizations, and then the digital ID. Like consolidating all these pieces of data in, I don't know if I'm presenting this in like a way that makes sense. It just kind of is lining up in my head that there's a digital ID thing and then this think family thing. I don't know, like how many other organizations are collecting these kinds of data that are essentially um, open to be used and yeah, used in this way. And the council, the NHS, for example, like the NHS has been kind of dying, where
Mhm.
lots of things that used to be within the NHS as an entity is now you have to go to some like third party provider, and
Yeah,
those are corporate organizations. Like you don't really have as much say of whether like the way they use your data.
yeah,
And so can you imagine the digital ID, this thing family thing, and this whatever they're doing with healthcare,
yeah.
like the sort of amount of things that you can do is not just like about, I think, predicting people's like ability to offend or whatever, but I think it's like you can build whole, you can you can kind of sequester whole populations of people. You know,
Yep.
you can en masse be disempowering, or you be taking the land away from people, being like, I don't know, this, like the Minority Report thing is that you're arrested before you commit a crime, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I feel very, I don't know, I feel very strongly about the fact that people's kind of inability, not inability, but people's like access to information and knowledge, their lack thereof is being exploited here. And they've been like, we're being sold a narrative
Hmm.
of that infantilizes us and kind of makes it look like we can't understand what's best for us. We can't understand what the government's doing because they're doing really, really big things. And, you know, it's important to safeguard these vulnerable people who are unsafe. And, you know, all these like children who might offend, who like their parents might be alcoholics, da da da, all of these
Hmm.
things. I think, and all this information is kept, and where does the information go? And also, where is it being stored? In data centers. I'm pretty sure Amazon is getting some
Well, yeah, yeah.
information.
Is it even an English data center? Is it even a Bristolian data center? Like, is it even in the same country? Like with like specific like securities surrounding it. When you were saying about the digital ID, what then also came to mind is the porn thing that they did. So you know they've now made it so that people are giving over they have to give like their facial, like the facial recognition, or literally like their real ID to be able to access porn. So it's one of those things again where it's just like, okay, you're doing it based on almost saying like, hey, these places are so negative that we don't want our young people just to be able to access it. I agree with that. So what? So now you're going to make it so that those people have more information on us than they ever had. You know, like these places that we already know is in. So now I'm looking, it's almost like, so that part of it's going to be like where they can bribe you about stuff, and then like the healthcare thing you're talking about. I went to a meeting in 2017 when it was like about how Bristol NHS is looking at artificial intelligence and collecting it. And again, it's one of those things where ultimately there's an aspect of it where it will be useful, but at that point it needs to be completely transparent. It's not about you as the entity collecting data on everybody and then you coming with your conclusions. So you deciding, oh, we're going to let this person die and let this person live based on this thing or whatever. If you're being honest about it, it should be about you empowering the individual to have their own data so that they can make their own decisions. So that, again, it's like actually making people healthier through data rather than just having more control. And then again, it feels way more like a commercial enterprise, because what you were talking about in terms of these, like what these institutions are actually doing, it does kind of feel like maybe they're just collapsing, and this is actually the business model. The business model is because I can't remember exactly what it is, but I heard something about councils going bankrupt. I don't even really know what that means when I
I did
hear
a
that.
quick Google, and there was like, I didn't finish like really read it because I didn't have time, but it was like Bristol 24/7. Is that like a news outlet?
Hmm. Hmm.
They had an article about how like Bristol Council needed to find money because because museums have closed. Like there was things about like bin collection and like household waste and things like that. So that they need money, you know, they need an injection of cash. And also, like, you know, before that we'd been under austerity for so long. So
Yeah.
it's like, you know, and that's partly why the NHS has been so gutted and things like that, because of this
Hmm.
austerity. So, and even in that, it's been proven that people are getting paid. So I don't
Yeah.
think it's new. It's new that like governments tend to do these like really weird egregious things that they kind of like bury under their institutions. And then, you
Hmm.
know, things like I was reading about the fact that sterilization of Black women in America,
Hmm.
governments, like the governments in the different states sanction that. Do
Yep.
you know what I mean? So that's kind of what it feels like. How I think people's like, I think oftentimes the way that people kind of assume that the most vulnerable people aren't really well educated. They don't really have like vast amounts of like technical knowledge. Do you know what I mean? I think there's
Hmm.
like an assumption that in certainly in institutions that I've been to, I've heard people say stuff like that, which like
Yep.
blows my mind. And so like for me, like what's really important, this is what I was going to say actually, in order to make, I think, sustainable technology, you have to have like ethical moral implications on the same level as tech. Like you can't do
Yep.
it one or the other because
Hmm.
like otherwise, like you have unchecked power and
Yep.
someone's getting exploited. Do you know what I mean? People
Yep.
who are the most vulnerable, whose even interests aren't thought about within the genesis of tech, not in a sort of positive way. Like, you
Yep.
know what, like I didn't even see anything. It says like safeguarding, which is like a technical term, but I
Hmm.
didn't feel like, I didn't see that it was trying to like, it wasn't saying like I'm addressing this and this and this
Hmm.
specifically, and this and this and this is how, and this is how the think family is going to do it. When I was like, you'd have to read, I think, loads of different things to even piece those things together. So I
Yeah.
just think like inherently, because they're not doing that, like it is gonna be exploitative. Like this, like capitalism kind of manufactures your consent. And
Yep.
that's really what they're doing. They're
Yep.
manufacturing the people's who maybe don't even have time to read the small print. You know, this
Hmm.
woman is coming or this person is coming from the council to collect like social whatever information. I am not consenting to someone taking that information, putting it in a database, and then giving it to someone else to like run mathematical models, like modeling on, and then like come up with like conclusions. Like,
Yep.
I'm curious about the consent part, but I just feel very like strongly about the fact that, yeah, I think this is probably the worst thing in Europe.
Well, and just on what you were saying then about how the technical, like the technical aspects have to be in line with the ethical ones. For me, what that also means is that an education on every aspect of it has to also be at the forefront. So it's like for me, if this was being done honestly on the same page of the website that's talking about creating this, there would be a link to another website that just gives you all the basics on how AI works. Like this is machine learning and the out like it would literally be like there would be a whole curriculum that is out for free that at the end of the curriculum you understand. So that's so not only is the council not talking about the specifics in terms of what it is that they're creating, but they're not even educating people on what AI is in the first place. And for me, the paradox of that is that AI can actually teach you. They wouldn't even need to make the curriculum. They could
Yeah,
give you the prompts to go and put into another AI, and then it would teach you about it. So then that's when it's like, this is about planned obsolescence. This is actually about furthering that gap right now. There's an energy, and let's just say, for argument's sake, that like 50% of young people really like AI and all it can do, and 50% of them hate it. It feels like they're actively trying to just like create that split in between, like knowing that some people are going to know about it and know about some of the wording, but rather than trying to group it together and say, hey, do you know what? No matter what your opinion on it is we're going to do this thing and this thing is good, and here's all the foundational building blocks about how you understand how AI works so that you don't even have to take my opinion on it. You can learn all the
yeah,
basics about AI, then look at our papers about what we're doing specifically, and between those two you should be able to see how this is actually going to benefit people. They don't want to educate people on this, and it's just very, very telling again about how it's being used in all other aspects. So we haven't had a message come out since 2022 saying, hey, our council is now super efficient because we're now using these internal AI models to like upgrade our communication, and like, hey, we've made the prison system more efficient because we've used it here. Like we're not hearing any of that. So we're not getting any of the advantages that we know are happening because that fear about people losing their jobs is real. So that aspect is happening. So people are using it to benefit themselves commercially. But again, that's the difference between. I'm not saying that capitalism's okay, but we just know what that is, and that's that battle. That the council is not meant to be operating under those models. The council isn't meant to be having little trade secrets about what they're doing and secret little databases, like your specifically to Bristolians. It should be open, even if you're not going to put it on the website. It should be something that a Bristolian should be able to say, like, "Hey, can you send me the package? Like, can you like? There's all this information about AI. Can you send me the official Bristol City Council?" And I do know that in the back, I've seen a couple of little things like that, where they've had little packs like for teachers or something. But even that, it's like it shouldn't be something in the back of their website. Like that should be a thing that gets sent to parents as well as teachers to say, hey, this is the kind of thing that we're thinking about in terms of the education system. So yeah, it seems like it seems like it's terrible. Everybody who reads about it seems like it's possibly going to be one of the worst. And maybe what we'll say then is because that what did you say? The insight. What was it? An article from them?
I,
Like,
oh no, it's like what happens is corporate entities produce all these giant documents which introduce themselves and talk about what they're doing, what they would like to do, kind of
mhm.
like what the thing we were talking about, mission statement in a
Yeah,
way, but
yeah.
it's like a dossier on like, yeah, like, oh, in 2023, 50% of people love this, that kind of stuff. It's 31 pages long. I haven't read it. I'm gonna read it.
Well, that was
um,
I didn't see that. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just both have a read of that, and we'll come back next week and we'll share it with the people of Bristol.
yeah,
If you're down, cool, cool. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching this episode, and as always, I hope you're having a blessed day, and I hope you have a blessed year.
yeah, thank you. Like, share, and subscribe.
Yo, final, pero